Water Governance and Politics at the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, and I serve as network coordinator of NEWAVE. So today is the 11th appointment of the thematic seminar series as part of the NEWAVE Diffused conference, which started at the beginning of April, and we will be following until the end of the year with bi-weekly online webinars. The thematic seminars features NEWAVE early-stage researchers who will guide us through the key water governance aspect that they have been investigating during the NEWAVE project. And today I'm very happy to introduce Sinafekesh Girma Wolde. Her lecture, titled Adapt or Depart, Examining the Nexus of Scarcity of Water and Environmental Migration in East Africa. Sina is an early career researcher, PhD candidate, and youth advocate with a robust educational background in civil engineering and integrated water resource management. She is a NEWAVE early stage researcher, and her professional journey spans from engineering to humanitarian and development projects across East Africa, where she played a pivotal role in providing wash and water supply facilities to communities in arid regions. Her unique blend of technical expertise and hands-on humanitarian and development work has provided her with a user-centric mindset, which is crucial for her research on global water governance and the critical intersection of water and migration in Ethiopia and Somalia. In addition to her academic work, Sina is a passionate advocate for young water professionals, serving on the boards of the Water Youth Network and on the Ethiopian Geophysical Union International. Her proactive engagement has led to speaking at the UN Water Conference and presenting and translating research works to academics and the public through conferences, workshops, and scientific publications. Moreover, and congratulations for that, Sina, she has been recently hired by Yale, specifically at the Center for Environmental Justice, which she will join once her PhD will be awarded at the Politecnico of Milan. Sina is supervised by Professor Maria Cristina Rulli, Professor of Hydrology at the Politecnico of Milan, and a very recent AGU Fellow, just recently elected. Congratulations also to Cristina for this fantastic achievement. As discussants, we have, and we are very fortunate to, Professor Mark Muller, Associate Professor at the University of Notre Dame, and also head of the group Coupled Human Water Systems at EWAG in Switzerland, together with Edoardo Borgomeo, Associate Professor of Water Engineering at the University of Cambridge. So, without more words, I would like to move on to the organization of the session. We will have between 20 and 25 minutes presentation by Sina, which will be followed by 10 to 5 minutes reaction by her supervisor, Professor Rulli, and then we will open the discussion to Mark and Edoardo. Finally, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. Please write your questions in the chat, and I will do my best to moderate the questions. So without further ado, Sina, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jean-Paul, and welcome everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. So as Jean-Paul already introduced, so today I will present about my research, and starting from what do you think when you open your social media and newspapers and you see this kind of post? What comes to mind? Some humanitarian agencies and development organizations, they post this information about climate refugees, climate migration, upcoming displacement, or upcoming threat to migration. So, and they express they categorize these peoples as climate migrant, climate refugees, but what do they mean by that? So, the term environmental migration, which I will use in today's presentation and also what I used in my research, is not internationally agreed upon term yet, because many researchers in the field use a variety of other terms to describe the phenomena that has been referred as environmental migration. So, environmental migration is the movement of people or group of people because of the reason of sudden or progressive changes in the environment that adversely affects their life or their living condition. And these people either are forced to leave their place of residence, or they are voluntarily or temporarily leave their residence. So these people are also referred to as climate refugees, climate migrant, environmental refugees, and internally displaced people. So today we will focus on migration-related hydroclimatic variability and environmental change. So the nexus between migration and environmental change is of a great interest for many research fields, addressing the human dimension of global change and related migration adaptation strategies. As a result, different actors on the topic have their own perspective and way of studying the topic. So, the first group is the climate change scientists, which mainly focus on the nature of environmental drivers by taking biophysical change caused as a result of climate change, their starting point of research. So, researchers Hassam and Norman are the one who introduced the topic in the early 90s as referring as environmental refugees. But their work and prediction on the topic was criticized because of the methodology they used and how they framed environmental migration. So Mayer, in his work, referred that in 1995 that 20 million people are environmental refugees. But his work was highly criticized because he took stock of the people, not really distinguishing between environmental drivers and non-environmental drivers. While El Hinawi predicted that he also referred as 30 million people being environmental refugees in 2004. And at the end, the United Nations Environmental Programme, echoing this research, predicted that in 2010, 50 million people will be displaced because of environmental change. But when 2010 came and this number failed to materialize, the debate on the topic continued while these works were criticized. On the other hand, we have migration researchers whose research focuses on understanding environmental migration as a multi-causal process involving economic, social, and environmental factors and focusing on localized cases. While climate change scientists often view displacement as a negative consequence, migration researchers see it as an adaptation strategy. The other actor on the topic are disaster risk reduction and humanitarian actors. These actors initially used to focus on reducing disaster risk rather than migration, but after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, they started their work focusing on migration as a key global risk. These actors emphasize on legal protection and better data collection methods, while disaster risk reduction efforts increasingly integrate risk reduction and preparedness strategies. And the other actors are development actors, which mainly focus on slow onset disasters, while disaster risk reduction actors focus on extreme event or sudden event disasters. So, development actors recognize the link between climate change and environmental factors and poverty. Understanding the disaster can push people into poverty. There is a growing acknowledgement of the need to address the impact of environmental change on migration, develop appropriate response through evidence-based research, and implementing adaptation projects. Last but not least, we have the group of international lawyers, conflict researchers, and security agencies. So, international lawyers are still engaged in discussion about the protection and human rights of those displaced as a result of environmental change, highlighting the gap between existing laws and the need for international conventions. While political scientists examine the security implication of climate change, arguing that while environmental degradation can contribute to conflict, it interacts with various other factors. And migration scholars, as I said before, they emphasize on the positive benefit of security agencies mainly focus its potential contribution to conflict. So, going back to the scientific community, scientists from different fields have tried to document and explain the link between environmental change and migration, raising critical questions to support their hypothesis with existing evidence. So, as a result, there is a widely ongoing debate that started in the early 90s when the maximalist point of view theory came to exist. This theory suggests that environmental factors are the primary drivers of migration, although this view has faced criticism for oversimplifying the complexity of migration dynamics. It also failed to explain that not all migration relate to environmental change in the same manner. And we also have other researchers emphasizing that community vulnerability and lack of adaptive capacity often plays more significant role in migration than environmental change alone, with migration sometimes viewed as a coping mechanism rather than permanent displacement. And other scholars also questioned existing evidence regarding the extent to which environmental change induced significant refugee movement, whether environmental factors are primary drivers of migration in a complex situation or not. So, the complexity of environmental migration drivers is increasingly recognized as non environmental factors such as socioeconomic conditions, political instability, cultural ties also significantly influence migration decisions, complicating the relationship between environmental change and migration outcomes. So, the ongoing debate about whether environmental migration is more significantly exacerbated by rapid population growth in developing countries rather than climate change alone, with some scholars arguing that environmental conditionality imposed by developed nations condemn some developing countries to remain in persistent poverty, triggering human displacement. And recent studies also highlight the role of climate change, natural disaster, and resource scarcity as a significant driver of migration, particularly in vulnerable regions of Africa, challenging the dominant narrative that migration is attributed to violence and political conflict. So, as a result, our research tries define these problems that, to see the significant research gap that still remains concerning the need for more comprehensive data and analysis to understand the specific mechanism by which environmental factors influence migration, decisions, and patterns. It's still unclear to what extent migration occurs as an adaptive strategy for people dealing with adverse environmental conditions and what evidence exists to support the hypothesis that human migration in sub-Saharan Africa may be induced by environmental change. And there's also lack of clarity regarding the criteria to determine whether environmental conditions act as primary or secondary driver of migration, especially in complex scenarios where multiple factors intersect. And also, there is the need for more research and investigation for indirect effect of environmental pressure on migration, such as how they may fuel economic decline, conflict, and which in turn influence migration pattern. So, the impact of research climate change trends, particularly increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events on migration pattern in vulnerable regions, need further investigation to assess their implication of future migration flows. Therefore, our research tries to identify the main drivers of environmental migration that underlie the migration behavior of sub-Saharan Africa countries through meta-analysis of migration studies and conceptual framework to detangle environmental migration drivers. And our research also assesses the water resource availability, hydroclimatic effects, events, food security or insecurity, and migration in East Africa by using set of carefully selected hydrological indicators. And further, we compare the evolution of environmental behavior with the evolution of scarcity of water indicators to identify possible interrelationship and potential impact of specific hydrological event on migration. And at last, we determined future scenarios of changing environmental migration pattern based on projected change in the level of scarcity of water indicator. Moving to the first case, which is environmental migration in sub-Saharan Africa. Uh, Sub-Saharan Africa is highly dependent on hydroclimatic conditions for food production, and it also has low adaptive resilience to high level of hydroclimatic variability, which exposes the region to extreme conditions marked by both excess water, such as long wet season, flood, cyclone, and water deficiency events, such as dry season and drought. So the people who are most affected by these extreme hydroclimatic events are always those living in vulnerable locations, such as semi-arid and arid regions. For this reason, Sub-Saharan Africa is regarded as a global hotspot of conditions that favor vulnerability to the adverse effect of environmental and climatic stress as a result of its dependence on rainfed agriculture and lack of adaptive capacity. So hydroclimatic change may increase or decrease the plausibility of migration, but these outcomes are highly dependent on underlying non-environmental context or drivers. These factors expose communities in sub-Saharan Africa to high vulnerability and associated susceptibility to migration or forced displacement in response to environmental change. So, environmental migration drivers in sub-Saharan Africa are grouped into two main categories as excess water events and as water deficit events. The availability, quality, and distribution of water resources deeply impact human population, often influencing their decision to migrate or stay. Water-related factors can trigger both forced and voluntary migration, shaping people movement in various ways. In normal cases, water abundance is generally considered as a valuable resource, but it can also be a driver of displacement or migration. Water abundance could take place as a driver of environmental migration, could take a form of flooding, erosion, sea level rise, landslide, mudslide, storm, cyclone, and also in the form of hydro conflict, in which multiple stakeholders fight to have control or access on unevenly distributed water resources. And on the other hand, we also have water deficit environmental migration drivers related to water deficiency would take the form of acute water shortage, lack of access to clean water, food insecurity, hydro conflict again as a competition over limited water resource, and environmental degradation. So, in our research, we examined environmental migration drivers of human displacement across 32 countries in sub-Saharan Africa from 87 case studies from the period of 1990 to 2021. From each case study, we collected the environmental change data, when the event started and when it ended, the type of event, additional exacerbating driver, the number of people displaced because of these events, their destination country or region, type of migration, the author and date of that case study or publication, and some other remarks of each case studies. After we documented these 87 case studies carefully, we used the method of conceptual framework analysis, qualitative comparative analysis, and statistical correlation to analyze this data. So I will share some of outputs from this research. As you can see, there is a web of arrows and bubbles here. So in each bubble or circle, we see the driving event, and we also see the number of people displaced and from how many countries from these case studies were these people displaced. So I understand it looks a bit complicated, but let's see example. For example, we read cyclone. Let's start from cyclone. So cyclone displaced 2.8 million people from 15 countries, and it's highlighted in blue to indicate that it's an extreme sudden event. When it happens, people are pushed out of their residence immediately. And the cyclone didn't only cause immediate displacement, but it also caused flood, which led to displacement as well. In other countries, the cyclone also caused river bank bursting, leading to an increased river or sea level rise, which later caused landslide and flood. So you can see in each circle for how many countries are affected by each event and how many people were displaced. So in these case studies, for example, landslide also caused the destruction of property and displacement. In other case studies, again, landslide were caused by floods. that started as a result of heavy rain or storm. So if we go back to some steps backward and ask how did this all start, we will see that non-environmental underlying drivers or reasons that exposed communities' vulnerability and lessens their capacity to adapt to these extreme events or slow onset events. So these reasons you can see on the left are, for example, there is a poorly constructed infrastructure, underdevelopment, lack of preparedness, threat to livelihood, or lack of climate change policy and law. So again, on the left side or right side for me, we see case studies related to water deficiency. So the displacement drivers highlighted in green are slow onset events, while the gray, the ones highlighted in gray are drivers that are combination of both sudden and extreme events. And the main difference from the previous category of water abundance is the addition of accumulated environmental change. These events highlighted in brown are slowly emerging environmental change, putting pressure on already vulnerable communities over a long period of time. On the left, we see accumulated change that led to food insecurity, and on the right, we see accumulated change that led to drought. So, unlike the excess water event, some people displaced as a result of low rainfall related drivers tend to practice circular migration, in which they move to a nearby city or other regions to get additional income in the dry season and go back to their residence in the wet season. Uh, Further on the results, here we see the output of our research as a graph and also as a map, mainly showing that the eastern and western regions of Africa are highly affected by water deficit drivers, while the central and the southern part of Africa are highly affected by water abundance drivers such as flood, cyclone, heavy rain, and storms. And here we see the result of the quantitative comparative analysis, which we use to construct these mosaic tables from the truth table of the QCA. And these mosaic tables demonstrate 5 distinct combinations between the various environmental change driver categories, such as we have the economic and social hardship versus vulnerability, we have low rainfall, degradation versus heat shock, and we have direct and indirect environmental drivers, low and high rainfall, and high intensity versus poor infrastructure planning. In this mosaic graph, you see the number of cases that intersect between these drivers. So the push from this environmental change varies in degree, scale, intensity of the event. We found out that about 54% of the cases covered in this article were from people displaced, people from rural communities relying on farming and pastoralism. Again, the map you see is the QCA analysis result that shows the optimal result for parsimonious solution from direct drivers. This paper only reports the parsimonious solution as it is considered the most robust and capable of reducing redundant variables from the formula using logical remainders. The results show that the probable occurrence of displacement as a result of flood concentrating on Central, East, and South Africa regions, while landsliding will have a high influence in East, West Africa, and Madagascar. The analysis further emphasizes that displacement as a result of drought without dry spell, while Zambia is the only country that will most likely experience the cumulative effect of flood, landslide, and drought displacing more people. And then on the right, you will see the conceptual framework derived from our empirical analysis. So, as a conclusion, the results from the theoretical analysis and the QCA reveal that the complex web of causal links are the main drivers of environmental migration in sub-Saharan Africa. While individual extreme or slow onset events with high intensity and severity are very critical migration inducers. However, the existence of non-environmental underlying factors play a significant role by exposing population to cumulative environmental change and hindering the resilience. So 85% of African migration is mainly concentrated as active cross-border or inter-African movement. And this is where future studies we recommend to focus and synergize to understand, to broaden our understanding of migration movement patterns. You can read more on this case study on the paper as seen on the presentation. So moving to the second and third case studies, here we see the scarcity of water and environmental migration dynamics in Somalia and Ethiopia. So Somalia is a country that is highly reliant on subsistence farming, and also we have other humanitarian crises and ongoing conflict in the country. So multiple environmental change drivers add a complex of layer to this already existing issues, in which farmers and pastoralist communities are the most vulnerable and highly affected group of people. And on the other side of Ethiopia, environmental migration in Ethiopia is driven by natural hazard, climate variability, harvest failure, soil erosion or productivity, livestock days, locust breakouts, population pressure on ecosystem, and lack of thriving local economy and limited alternative livelihood choices. So both countries have a high area of semi-arid and arid climate prevalence. So, from these case studies, we derived the framework of aridity to exodus framework, which focuses on the cascading flow of, as the time increases, how hydroclimatic variability induces scarcity of water indicators in the form of food insecurity, clean water or agricultural water scarcity, and drought, which lead to environmental migration and where community will respond either to adapt, move, or choose circular migration. So these three indicators identified from our framework, we separately computed these indicators using various input data as shown in the data. And we also have additionally the environmental migration data taken from the International Organization for Migration data set, which we work together with these indicators. So we use the methodology of multivariate spatial autocorrelation analysis and clustering using programming, hydrological modeling, and spatial analysis tools to identify and validate comprehensive, observed, and projected spatial environmental migration pattern both in Ethiopia and Somalia from the observed years and also projected years. So this animation shows the flow of environmental migration drivers in Somalia for each year, starting from the departure country, departure region, number of people displaced as number of internally displaced people, primary, secondary, and tertiary reasons. The primary region is the last push that gave the last push for people to displace or to leave their place of residence, while secondary and tertiary reason are more exacerbating factors. So in our study, we only focused on primary reasons that are related to climate, to environmental change. And as a result of our framework and our previous empirical analysis, we focused on reasons related to displacement because of drought. So since I have more slides to go on, I will go quickly. And this is the result of hotspot areas for each scarcity of water indicators, that is agricultural water scarcity, food insecurity, and drought. And then the last row showing the combined of the three indicators, which as a multivariate spatial autocorrelation output. Right? So this output shows that 76 to 91% of migrants originated from areas identified as statistically significant multivariate hotspots. But as you can see on the last row, some of the migrants are departure location are located in the cold spot. So we further investigated why some of the migrants are leaving from the cold spot areas. So as you know, we only consider drought indicator, and drought is a slow onset event. So it persists throughout many years. It's not like sudden event that causes migration immediately. So as a result, we developed this indicator, persistence index indicator, which takes into consideration the past years to add into the current observed year drought, food security, and agricultural water scarcity competition. So, as an example, if we would like to compute the persistence index for 2017, we will take the data from 2012 up to 2016 for 5 years, for example. And from the hotspot maps you already saw before, we see if there is hotspot, if that area or region is hotspot or not hotspot. Once we know it's hotspot, then we take the confidence level or Gini value from that input value, and we take the weight of each year. So most recent year have high weight, and the further the year, the weight reduces. Each hotspot value also has their own confidence label. So 90%, 95%, and 99% confidence label. So the higher the confidence label, the higher the weight. So we combine these to calculate the weighted persistence index for each indicators and for the combined value. As a result, now we are moving to the Ethiopian case study, but the methods follow similar ways. So for Ethiopian case study, you see on the first, second, and third row is the individual indicators of food insecurity, drought, agricultural water scarcity. And on the fourth row, you see the multivariate indicator output without persistence index. And then on the last row is with persistence index. So this correlation shows that statistically significant multivariate hotspot areas of drought, food insecurity, and agricultural water scarcity uh, are the main drivers of environmental migration in the country. And also the addition of persistence index has improved our result highly, and it gives us more accurate location for the departure of migrants. To further compare this output, so usually migration in both countries occur from the same location in different times. So we take the migration as an occurrence in which each occurrence has group of people. So we have on the left the graph showing how many of these occurrences fall in the hotspot areas. And on the right, we have how many of these occurrences occur in the hotspot areas, but we include persistence index to see. So, and without persistence index, 88 to 94% of drought-induced migration occur in the hotspot areas of food insecurity, drought, and agricultural water scarcity. And on the right, we see with persistence index, this accuracy is it increases from to 92 to 97% of drought-induced migration fall in these hotspot areas. And after that, we tried to see the future pattern of environmental migration in Ethiopia for the different RCPs, but we selected the optimal combination, capturing the low, intermediate, and very high emission scenarios, which is RCP 2.6, RCP 4.5, and RCP 8.5. So the combination of these shared socioeconomic pathways and representative concentration pathways helped us to evaluate the correlation between greenhouse gas emission scenarios and the corresponding population projection for scarcity of water indicators evaluation. As you can see, we also included 2022 to validate our result of observed area of vulnerable areas of migration for Ethiopia and with the RCP projections. Okay, so moving on. Sorry, I am a bit past my time. And then at last, we also evaluated to see how cold spot and non-significant areas could be activated to drive people from their place of residence. So in our previous results, you saw that some of the country regions are in cold spot and non-significant, while others were in hot spot. So this graph shows us the three main indicators in each region of Ethiopia. We only took 3 examples to show the outputs. These are 3 non-significant regions for this year for this specific RCP scenarios. And in bold, you see the safe triangle that signifies the safe range of variation for the 3 indicators, determined through the multivariate Getty-scored analysis. So these non-significant areas of environmental migration fall under safe range in the event of above-mentioned scenarios. These selected regions could be high-risk location for future displacement. As you can see, 2 of the 3 indicators are already outside the safe range. So this leads to the activation of the third indicator. In the case of Somali region, drought could be activated to cause multivariate environmental driver in the region. So, as a conclusion, communities in Ethiopia and East Africa have been quite resilient against change in rainfall pattern, but when this change spread to activate exacerbating factors, a holistic view of environmental driver and the interaction in the region is necessary, as you have seen in our research. So our research highlights the changing environmental conditions driving human displacement in sub-Saharan Africa and East Africa, focusing on the link between environmental migration and high-risk areas of drought, food insecurity, and water scarcity. The spatial autocorrelation of scarcity of water indicators, both univariately and multivariately, helps us to narrow down vulnerable regions of environmental migration. However, multivariate spatial analysis and clustering provides more accurate results compared to univariate analysis. So these results demonstrate that understanding and identifying areas prone to environmental migration flux are highly dependent on a cumulative driver approach rather than individual drivers. And our study also shows that when taking into account the persistence effect of slow onset hydroclimatic events from previous years into the current year, we could identify a robust projection of high-risk areas for environmental migration. Addressing the multifaceted layers of environmental migration driver in East Africa requires integrated climate change, migration, and integrating climate change and migration into policies across critical sectors like agriculture, food, livestock, and infrastructure to support adaptation projects and adaptation activities. Thank you for your attention. I will stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Sina, for this fascinating overview of your work, which really shows the multidimensional interrelations that there are when looking at water, climate, and migration. I think this is such an insightful work that you have been doing. So the first reaction following our agenda would be from your PhD academic supervisor, Professor Rulli, which I would like to invite and react to your presentation.
Thank you, Giampella, and apologize for arriving a little bit late, but I was in the department committee and today was very important. My presence was mandatory. So I'd like to leave the floor to our guest, especially because I know Eduardo has to leave early, and so I'd like to give the floor to Eduardo and then to Mark.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great, thank you. And thanks, Sina, for the great presentation. I think it shows the interdisciplinary spirit of NEWAVE in an excellent manner. The work is great, and I also enjoyed reading the first paper out of your work, which is the review. And actually, I wanted to start from that. So the first part of your presentation, to just share an idea and then ask you what you think about it and how you'd implement it. I think that paper shows the importance of course, collating evidence from different sources and then trying to harmonize it into a consistent data set and database that then allows us to understand the the role of environmental drivers in migration. And to my knowledge, there isn't yet a database that really codes migration events across sub-Saharan Africa or Africa in general, as for example done in the ACLED database, which is the one that, as you know, codes armed conflict events around the world. So a first idea and then question for you would be, do you think it would be feasible to set up such an event database? And then what would it take to essentially relate that geocoded migration database to environmental drivers, many of which are now represented or can be represented through gridded data sets, rainfall, drought, so soil moisture indices, etc. So I think my first idea and then question to you, Sina, is around the feasibility of setting up such a database, which then would allow us to be more spatially explicit in the analysis of environmental migration, and also apply spatial econometrics to understand what role environmental drivers play in determining these events, in the same way that ACLED is used to understand the links between environmental factors and armed conflict. So this is the first kind of idea, and so it's just a question. Then I played back the question to you in terms of what's your opinion, how feasible is this, and what would it take to for the research community to realize this. And then secondly, and this is more of a question on the kind of the second case that you showed for Somalia and Ethiopia specifically. I just wanted to understand, so when we're looking at the maps for Ethiopia, especially 2020, 2021, and 2022, when there was the conflict in Tigray, I just wanted to understand, is that kind of filtered out of the data, or are the migration data that you use are you only showing the migration data for which people highlighted environmental driver as the main factor behind their choice to migrate? So I just wanted to understand that essentially the role of conflict in those specific maps and data that you showed for Ethiopia. And then a final idea is around, again, looking at the Somalia and Ethiopia case studies. So you have this forward-looking analysis using climate scenarios, which is great. And I think it would be equally important, especially when you're now considering showing these results to policymakers. It'd be great to, of course, have the analysis of future scenarios, but also I think you need to show some adaptation options, or the adaptation dimension in terms of what could be done. And I mean, some ways of doing that could be groundwater accessibility maps, for example, or any understanding of the type of infrastructure that might be present on the ground, even though, as we know, maps of infrastructure are very difficult to obtain, or they're not of very high quality, or any other. I mean, perhaps this is something that we can brainstorm on, but I think having an adaptation dimension to the end of your case study would be particularly important, because if you have the forward-looking analysis, you also then need to give people an idea of what solutions are available to manage the risk that you identify. So these are my 3 main points, and thanks again for the great seminar.
Thank you, Eduardo. So I will first address your questions. Yes, creating such database to highlight the high-risk areas or vulnerable areas for environmental migration is possible. Currently, there is I have come across this migration displacement database. I will share the link later, but it only focuses on drought. And so now again, what we are trying to highlight with our research is that environmental migration is caused by multi variables. It's not caused by only one driver. So integrating our research into this kind of platform is quite possible. And yeah, so it's more like also that website has this different climate change overlaid on predicted drought areas. So you could overlay the maps to see which are vulnerable areas. But in our case, we already integrated these 3 indicators. So yeah, it's quite possible. And maybe that could be the direction we will go in the future after the completion of the PhD. For the case of Ethiopia, no, we didn't include the conflict of Tigray for 2021. And I mean, in all cases, in all the years, we focused on the environmental migration drivers. But like I showed on the animation, which was for Somalia, but we used the same way for Ethiopia. Normally, environmental migration have primary, secondary, tertiary drivers. So when people were interviewed, they were asked to describe which these layers of drivers, and we focus on the primary driver that is caused by environmental change, and then we further filtered it for drought-induced displacement because that was the dominant answer from the survey. And thank you for your feedback about the adaptation options. Yeah, definitely that is something to include on the research and also for decision makers and policy makers. For the groundwater map, it does not. We don't have for Ethiopia, but for Somalia it exists. I'm not sure if it's updated frequently, but they already have a map, like a interactive map that shows, I think, in the Swalim database. They have this interactive map that shows groundwater resources in the country and which are still working and which are not still working. It shows this. I could also share that in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sina. Maybe if I may, just one follow-up point on the first question. And I think I did not express myself clearly, but I think the suggestion and idea there would be to consider essentially expanding the work on your first paper to see if you can turn that into a regularly updated database like MDAT or ACLED that mines the internet or newspapers, publications, a wide range of sources to then provide a regular update on environmental migration events. And then people could use that to do, of course, lots of interesting work, including spatial econometrics, modeling, projections like you have done. So I think that was just a suggestion and encouragement. I think the work is great. You have a structure in place and kind of a query function. So it'd be interesting to see what else would be needed to then make it kind of an automatic event database on environmental migration. And maybe we need to speak with IOM or someone else. Okay, thanks. Over.
Definitely. But yeah, it's possible with better resource. It's doable. Or we even talked with Professor about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eduardo. Thank you for the suggestion and for the support. So now we can move to Mark if Eduardo and his question. So
sure. Hi.
Hey,
Sina, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it was a great pleasure to hear you talk about your research, which I read your first paper that you presented early in the talk. And so my comments will mostly focus on this one because that's the one I'm the most familiar with, I guess. And I think it's a really cool effort to bring some semblance of order into chaos that is environmental research at the moment, because it's very much like environmental conflict, which I'm a bit more familiar with. People migrate for all sorts of reasons, on all sorts of scale, with all sorts of timing, during all sorts of durations. And so really trying to disentangle the role of the environment in this very complex process is a monumental task. And a lot of different fields have tried to do that and bumped head to some extent, right? So it's a very factious, field as a scholarly pursuit. And you really kind of took upon yourself to go and analyze those very different papers from the very different fields with a very different perspective to try to see if there is some common thread, right? To try to disentangle it to identify kind of fundamental causal relationship, which I think is super nice and super admirable. And beyond this, you kind of use this to kind of reconstruct, a framework that kind of gives a more holistic overview on environmental migration in sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly focusing on the effect of the environment and the kind of cascading factor. Environment plays a role at many different locations in the causal pathway, and your work really kind of highlights that. So to kind of move on to my questions and discussion point, I really have 2.5 questions for you, and they're very kind of dumb and conceptual, so bear with me a little bit. The first one is actually really, really kind of broad, and I guess a bit provocative. So I wanted to really kind of take a step back and ask a very naive question. So why do we even care about environmental migration? So I get that we care about migration because it's a lot of hardship. It's a very big phenomenon. It causes a lot of social, economic, political, environmental impacts that should be dealt with. But why do we care about the specific role that's played by the environment in that process? And the reason why this question is not completely stupid is because presumably, any other social process that causes or drives migration could be dealt with, right? You could put in policy to kind of, deal with political instability and stuff like that. But there's very little you could do directly to mitigate the environment, right? And so why do we really care about the environment, as opposed to all the other processes as a key driver of migration? So I would love actually to hear your thought on this, but it's it's easy to ask them questions, but it's a bit more difficult to answer to them. So I'm going to give I guess 3 points that I thought about, and then maybe you could react to them. So my first point here, the reason why environments matters, I think it's a question of responsibility. So if we could actually draw a link between environmental extremes and even more climate change and migration, then it really becomes kind of a global problem. And not only because of the impacts, like people moving around sub-Saharan Africa, eventually the effect will ripple through and affect us as a global village, I guess. But if there is really a link between climate change and environmental migration, then there is also a causal link, right? It's kind of also our ethical responsibility as a global north to address it. And so that's, in my opinion, the first reason we should care about the effect of the environment on this kind of broad global phenomenon. The second point that I would bring is predictability, and I'm guessing this is a key factor in your research, right? So it's very difficult to predict both the environment and people, but it's perhaps easier to predict the environment than to predict people. We have a very good model on hydroclimatic extreme, etc. So if there's even a slight correlation between migration and environmental variables, it's worth kind of investigating this correlation and using this to predict, where migration will occur, what type of migration will occur, etc. So I think this alone is a very important reason. And the third reason, I think, is actionability. So if we are not only able to predict where migration will occur based on correlation, but we are able to understand why migration will occur and how it is caused by the environment, then we have what it takes to act upon it, right? And here, the parallel that I always use in class when I teach about environmental conflict is that we know that there's a big correlation between, heat extreme, for example, in conflict, right? People tend to fight when it's abnormally hot or abnormally cold, right? But there's very different pathways by which this correlation can operate, right? You could think about, for example, income shocks, right? Like crops are failing when it's very hot, and so there's low opportunity cost to engage in conflict. But then there's psychological research that showed that people also tend to be more aggressive when it's hot, right? And so you could use a policy like crop insurance and stuff like that to address the former. But if just people get more mad when it's hot, insurance won't do anything, right? And so in the same way, if you understand why people migrate under pressure from climate extreme, then there's something you could do about that. And in that sense, I really like your mosaic plots. So the one that you showed in your presentation, you went fairly quickly over them, but I think they really give a cool overview of all these potential causal factors and causal links, and more importantly, their relative salience, right? You have like some that matters a lot in your sample, some that matter little, etc. And so that kind of gives us some overview of which causal links actually matter, and then you kind of combine it together in a kind of more accessible framework that could be acted upon. And I guess this brings me to, that was kind of a long detour to bring me to my second question, which is, how do you expect that people might use this framework for actual policy in actual context, right? So you took contextual studies, you kind of disassembled them, disconstructed them, and reconstructed it in some transferable framework. But then in order for that to be actually useful in practice, you have to adapt it to specific contexts, right? So how do you imagine this broad framework being contextualized and used to address specific migration events? And my kind of last half question that I had is, what would such a policy look like? Because some argue that migration should not necessarily be seen as a failure to adapt, but rather as a proactive adaptation strategy when it comes to climate change, right? So, and in that sense, migration is legitimate, so to say, right? There's no real other solution. And so what would a migration policy look like? Should we aim to mitigate migration? Should we instead be looking at ways to support it as a legitimate adaptation strategy? Like what would, how should we think about migration from a policy perspective, and how could your framework could actually help us? Over.
Thank you, Mark. A very interesting point of view. So I will start from the first one. Why do we care? Why shouldn't we care? As like I said, so different disciplines see it differently. So for example, the migration researchers see it as a positive, it has benefit because I mean migration due to environmental change has been happening historically for a very, very long time, and it always had the positive sense of we are adapting to change. But now this change is translated into like sort of, well, it's not only for environmental migrants, but also for other migrants to be considered as a threat when they go to another country. And the legality is also different from previous times. So as a result, we need a more orderly migration pathways, and people should be allowed to be able to adapt if they could, if not to depart. But so why are we caring about this now more? Because before environmental change or like very intense or extreme environmental change used to happen less frequently, but now they are becoming more frequent. And for example, I could give my country, Ethiopia. Drought used to be maybe every 10 years or 15 years. Now we have literally every year. And every year we still act surprised, we are not prepared, and we are always reactive and we look for aid, we try to, but if we have this kind of studies to help us devise policies, to help us prepare and already devise adaptation strategies and projects, then we will be prepared, we will be more proactive. So that way we will actually help people to adapt instead of depart. And also, there is no protection for people displaced because of these reasons. For example, drought is a slow onset event, so it could be mitigated. But let's say flood, cyclone in Mozambique last year, in South Africa, in Madagascar, it literally takes the houses away from the ground, and they don't have the capacity to adapt to this change. So they have to migrate, but there is no law or there is no asylum specifically for people flooding in drought or cyclone or tropical cyclone. So they need protection. They need safe ways to be able to continue their life. I mean, no one wants to leave their home for sure, unless they are really forced to do so. So we are hoping this kind of research could help us reach that stage of having legal protection for people who are in need of or who are displaced because of extreme events or extreme hydroclimatic events, because these events are becoming more persistent as the years go on. And how can it be translated into policy? So mainly this framework is to help them because, like we said, it's a bit of complex relationship and it's not directly related always. So you have to start from the source, from the non-environmental drivers, going to the environmental drivers, and then how people are affected, how their livelihood is affected. So the framework is supposed to show how the time increases and this hydroclimatic variability leads people to either adapt or depart at the end. So adapting this framework into drought, for example, there are drought policies in many countries, but there are no policies integrating drought with food security, drought with the agricultural water scarcity or other persistent environmental changes for action. So it's this kind of research is to help decision makers and policy makers to integrate multivariate drivers of environmental migration into their policy. Not just one driver like drought, but more the drivers, to include more drivers into the policy. I hope I've covered all the questions.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much for indulging me.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mark. If there are other questions from the audience, there is one on the chat. I can read it. Thank you for the insightful analysis of drivers for migration. Could you say more about how this work could help understand resilience capacity of those who do not migrate, and how interventions might affect adaptations and resilience? And sorry, Mark, I didn't ask you if you have further questions.
I'm good. I'll cede the floor to the audience who have more interesting questions than me, probably. So.
Yeah, in any case, okay. So this question is from the audience. It's from Brian.
Okay. Like this work mainly is highlighting the high risk or vulnerable areas that are prone to environmental migration, which helps us to devise, it could be projects or adaptation strategies to increase the resilience capacity of the people living in those areas. So it will help us to prepare and to plan ahead. That's how we could integrate this kind of research into policy or specific interventions. It could be through local government or development agencies or humanitarian agencies to help us prepare and plan for these vulnerable areas, to increase the resilience of people living in these vulnerable areas.
So other questions from the audience? And Gianpel, do you have questions?
Yes, of course. I will take advantage of this position. So I really appreciated both points from both interventions from Eduardo and Mark. And Mark, I think you are absolutely right that that the underlying question, why does it matter, has all sorts of political implications. And of course, in your words, something that clearly comes across is that this type of understanding has implications for environmental justice and water justice, both theories, but as well as practical implications. So I think it's a really good point that you made there. And there are a couple of things that I observed when dealing with these type of environmental explanations of big societal changes, and is it conflict, or is it migration, or is it other type of dimensions where there could be some level of geodeterministic perspective involved. And I think that this triggers some pretty strong epistemological confrontations. Christine and I, for example, were involved in a paper on conflicts related to water availability around the Lake Chad. And especially from a critical social science point of view, usually there is a general resistance to the idea that you can explain societal phenomena through environmental determinants, and I think that this is an area that needs further discussion and further integration between different epistemologies and between natural and social science. So this is a general reflection. I wonder if this also is something that Sina, you've encountered. And more concretely, I'm also curious to know, I am aware that you engaged with IOM. I'm not sure to what extent. I wonder if actually you also spent some time there. And so my general curiosity there is how our international, how is this specific international organization responding to the type of work that you do? So how do they see this idea of putting a focus on water, on climate change, and how much do you think this receives attention from that type of decision makers and in the international organizations community?
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Paul. Yeah, actually, IOM received my proposal to work with them and use their data very positively and with open hands. And they hosted me in their East African regional office. And they provided me with the internal data set as well as also publicly available data set. And it was quite helpful, I mean, for the environmental migration because they document the data really well, specifying the different reasons and from which place and to which place people are living, because of what reason, how many people, and also they take different data like their water availability, education, gender roles, like demographic information. And yeah, so also I was asked this question last week in a conference that what do you like advise future other researchers to do is to work with actors that are on the ground, like for the environmental migration cases. To work with first responders like IOM, UN OCHA, and other humanitarian agencies. They are the first responders and they are the one who have the data. And not to only do research, but desk research, but to be in the field, to actually talk with the people, to work with the people, and to engage with the local actors. That way we can understand and we can capture the dynamics of the different drivers in each specific regions or specific countries for that matter. Yeah, sorry, I think I went a little bit out of topic. So yeah, for that matter, so I say the interaction between the humanitarian agencies was my interaction was quite positive, and I also really highly recommend this integration of migration data from social scientists, also from local agencies with the scientific or more like natural scientists to integrate together.
Christina, is it okay if I build on Jean-Paul's comments, because I think it's very interesting.
Of course.
Okay, so I wanted to kind of react to his comment on environmental determinism, because I think this is a very important one. And I've in my work on environmental conflict, I also experienced this. And in my experience, like a key reason why this causes so much tempers to be raised is because if you go to the end of the idea and really these events are triggered by the environment, that kind of takes responsibility away from policy in a way. You use the environment as a scapegoat, right? There's nothing we could do. We have a drought, there's conflict, right? And I could really see the point in the context of conflict because it is fundamentally a bad thing, right? But in the context of migration, then the follow-up would be that the policies that you would put in place would be reactive rather than proactive. Now, and this coming back to my comment from previously, I'm not sure it would necessarily be a bad thing, right? If you really see migration as a legitimate, adaptation strategy, then perhaps you shouldn't, mitigate it or prevent it, but make policies in a way that that makes it happen in the best possible circumstances, if that makes sense, right? And so I was wondering if you could react to this. So when should migration be mitigated, prevented, encouraged, adapt? Do you see what I mean? Like there's really kind of two ways you could approach the issue. Either it is a failure to adapt, and so you should provide the people with the means to stay in place and adapt to climate change in a better way, so to say, or it is a legitimate adaptation strategy and you should make it happen the best way possible. I was wondering if you could react to this, as you know.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point, and perhaps something that we can further think about. My impression is that it's not only because of the let's say possible policy and actionable implications. I think that there are divergences in how we understand mainly causal determinism based on different types of epistemological background. So the idea that you can narrow down a complex factor to one singular cause, it's very, very much associated with a positivist type of.
No, it's impossible. We have seen that with other analysis, as Mark have seen last month, when another student of mine gave her dissertation. And yes, if you carry out an analysis taking account more than one factor, so what you see is that the environment, water, or also food, or also other factors related to the environment are important, but are not the only one that are important. So what it is important is a bunch of factors that are able to trigger the phenomenon you are taking in account. And so the measures have to be multiple measures, because each one of the factors you are dealing with are a sort of catalyst factor in triggering the phenomenon you are analyzing.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I think that I mean my experience trying to work in between natural and social science as a social scientist with perhaps more of a critical perspective is that there are useful complementary tools, and as long as you can get people and to understand each other, then usually you can enrich the discussion and perhaps the sacred grail of finding the one explanatory cause is not really what is meaningful. What is meaningful is providing a rich description and of this type of multi-causal, multi-scale type of dynamics. And I'm thinking perhaps putting here my new wave hat. I would be curious to hear a little bit from Sina. How has the experience of being a new wave early stage researcher, which was prevalently a water governance type of training network, so more of like a social science type of network, but being embedded in environmental engineering department with two hydrologists as the supervisors, how did you experience this life in between disciplines and in between different type of academic perspectives?
It's been very interesting experience coming from technical background and more like, I don't know, development project implementation sector. For me, the work of NEWAVE on water governance and many of the discussions we had on workshops were quite challenging, but they were also very I don't know, like they opened my mind to learn about these new theories, new frameworks, new way of doing things. For me, it was like learning about water governance from different perspective as a new student. And then taking that, I always try, okay, how can I include these things I learned from NEWAVE into my research? And it kind of brought this another perspective into my research to question how things are done from the perspective of the water governance perspective and from the different I don't know, reflexivity. And it was quite enriching experience to be able to combine all these different disciplines together in my work. It's been quite an enriching experience overall.
And if I'm correct, the new team that you will join at Yale is an environmental justice / law group. So how do you see this type of interaction?
Also a bit fearful, but also excited to see the new experience, because now they are this group I'm working with, they are taking the topic of climate migration into the politics. US politics, because they would like to increase the awareness on the topic, as it is not clearly understood by the public, and to also have positive research outputs supporting that the existence of climate migration, like we have done here as well, to gather more evidence to show the narrative of the climate migration side, especially with the US politics dealing with the extreme far right view of there is no climate change and it's not affecting or it's not driving migration at all. So the work of the group is mainly to take this into the political discussion. So it's quite exciting, and I'm really looking forward to engage with them further.
Fantastic. So I would like to hear if there are any questions from the audience. It's late in the afternoon, but perhaps there is someone that has some burning questions. If that's not the case, perhaps Christina, would you make a final concluding remark before we pass the closing of the seminar to Caterina?
Oh, yes. At first, I want to thank very much Mark and Edoardo. Unfortunately, Edoardo has to go, but in any case, I'd like to thank both of them. And of course, Mark, Edoardo, and also Jean-Paul are invited in Milan for the last round of the I don't know how to say, of the dissertation of the defense, because Sina has to give this one, then at the October 30, she has to give another presentation to the internal committee, and then the final one that it is supposed to be or in December or in January. We have to plan it with you three, Jean-Paul, Mark, and Edoardo. And so what I can say is that I'm very, very happy about what Sina have done till now, because the topic is not only very, very interesting for a scientific point of view, but it is also very important from a social point of view. And the fact that Sina has to, with big enthusiasm, she carry out analysis on this topic also, as you have seen, going to do field work in Ethiopia, but also in Kenya. Unfortunately not in Somalia, because it was not possible due to political reason. It was really, for me, it was really very important, because what you see in the field is not what you read in the papers. And so, unfortunately, I could not go, but Sina told me a lot about it, and she was able to gather a lot of data. And I hope that for the very final dissertation, the papers she's writing that are almost ready to be submitted will be, of course, submitted. And I don't know if we will have the first round of reviews, but in any case, they will be submitted. And yes, now, and I want to thank to NEWAVE team, to in particular Jean-Paul and Caterina, because they were the big pivotal people of NEWAVE. And thanks to NEWAVE, not only the 15 ESRs grow a lot, but also the advisor like me. And so thank you very much, Jean-Paul, Caterina, and of course, Mark, Edoardo, and Sina too, and all the people attending this seminar today.
Thank you so much, Christina, then let me chip in here and also extend the appreciation to our colleague Arianna, who's working very hard on the backstage to help us promoting the seminars and also making the recordings available. So thank you to the full team. And as you say,
Sorry, I didn't mention you, but we never meet
yeah.
till now. But in any case, thank you very much.
That is also my job to thank everyone from the team, and also thank you as I echo your appreciations for all the speakers for this very interesting seminar, and also to all the participants. I hope you enjoyed the seminar as much as I did on the backstage, and I hope you will stay with us next week for the next seminar. So let me just share the screen. Did I share it already? No.